Hi everyone, I'm Paul Gallagher, Program Manager for Glasgow Film Theatre, and today really excited to be having a conversation about the new documentary Camino Skies. This is an excellent new film that just came out and is available online, and is about six pilgrims who go walking the famous Camino way, the Camino de Santiago. We'll talk a bit more about what that is in the course of this conversation. But just to say that the film, if you haven't seen it, is a really intimate, moving documentary that looks into what is it that inspires people and moves people to take this huge undertaking of this walk. And the film really gets into people who are in some ways broken in their lives and have gone on this walk as a way to try and figure out what's going on in their own lives. It does this in a really intimate and sort of observational way. And I'm really pleased to have the co-directors, Fergus, Grady, and Noel Smyth here to talk about the film. Hi, guys.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much, Paul.
No worries. And as well as the co-directors, we're also really pleased to have John Brierley, who's an expert on the Camino and everything to do with it. So he's going to come into the conversation, and we're going to talk a bit about the appeal of the walk and everything involved in it. Hi, John.
Hello.
But I'd like to start with Noel and Fergus. Guys, the Camino seems to have a particular appeal to filmmakers. This isn't the first documentary that I've watched about the Camino, and there's been feature films about it. And I just wondered, what were the specific circumstances and events that led to you guys saying, we're going to make our Camino film, basically?
It started with Fergus. He sort of said one day, what do you think about making a film about the Camino? And at that point, I knew of the Camino. My wife had walked it 10 years earlier, and at a time when she was going through a lot in her life. But other than that, I hadn't really thought about it much. And then so once we started researching it, though, it just became really intriguing about what draws so many people to walk this pilgrimage every year and come back again and again, because many people do it multiple times. And I think that was sort of the initial appeal, the initial draw to it, plus the fact that we knew going into it, it sort of had all of the elements to make fantastic viewing. You had really intriguing people with really interesting reasons for walking it. But then you also had this great self-contained journey through beautiful landscapes and countrysides and towns. And so if we were scripting it, we would script something like that. But yeah, we were just lucky that it's all there and ready to go.
And Fergus, in terms of this specific group, were these people that you, like Noel said, that you sort of brought the film in the first instance? Was it the people, or was it just the general idea?
A bit of both, Paul. We knew of Sue, who moderates the Australian Pilgrims Facebook page, and Claude, who's a published author based in Brisbane, before we started production. So they were the first characters or subjects to sign on to the film. And then as a Kiwi, I grew up in Wellington, and I wanted to make it a nice Anzac kind of Australian, New Zealand flavoured film. And it's nice to see the camaraderie between the two countries, even though there's a bit of, ribbing and tension at times. But it was a nice mixture of ages and females. And we had a father and son, Mark and Terry, that participated in the film as well.
And like, as I mentioned in my introduction, each of these people, we discover in the course of the film that each of these people, well, they've all encountered some kind of loss, or are kind of even going through that in this moment in different ways. For some, it's literal, the loss of a person. For others, it's a relationship. Was it always your intention from the start that that's what this film was going to be about?
I think it sort of came to that point organically. Like at the start, when we were looking for interesting stories to follow, we cast the net quite wide, and we were open to all sorts of stories, as long as we told people we were walking from this date to this date, and we wanted to make a film on the Camino. And if they had an interesting story, or felt they had an interesting story and wanted to share in a film, to get in touch. And then so we had a bunch of different people getting in touch, and from that group, it sort of was a common theme, and we felt it was also a perfect theme, and a theme that really resonates with anybody watching it. Everybody feels grief and goes through that at one point or another. So so it came about quite organically.
The walking itself, it's not easy. The distance, and then also the going up and down, the weather. So there is really this sense of suffering, but I think there is really something about the human spirit that is able to go beyond the physical pain.
Up to 500,000 people walk this every year, because not everybody, the official figures are only people who collect the actual Compostela itself. So you have, up to 500,000 reasons why people walk it, because everybody walks it for a personal reason. But if there was one sort of an overriding sense, you mentioned there that, a lot of people walk it, and your film with people struggling with issues, death of a loved one, loss of work, whatever. Usually sort of quite a sort of a traumatic something stops us in our tracks we start asking the bigger questions, those existential questions. But I think also what happens, a lot of people walk it that I know who don't really know why they're walking it, because their life is so busy, they can't see the wood for the trees anymore, and they've lost any sort of spaciousness in which to reflect on the fact that actually they have either deep trauma or problems or issues that they really weren't aware of. But the Camino makes them aware of it, because a big thing about the Camino is this block of time. There's a sense of spaciousness that we just don't have in our modern lives. Everybody is so busy. So the Camino is this wonderfully sort of cathartic experience that people bring themselves there, usually with knackered, tired, physical, spiritual, emotional muscles. And I think the draw is something about the Camino we know is directed towards bigger questions, deep, perennial questions of like, who am I? And very often, very usually, I would say in most cases, because we have brought ourselves to that space, the space allows answers to come. That's the efficacy and power of the Camino, because I don't know of any other vehicle in life which forces us down to a slow walking pace of 3 kilometers an hour. It forces us down to just relying on what we have on our back. It's this simple, slow moment where we can actually not only ask the questions, but have time for them to be answered.
And Fergus and Noel, all that John's saying there, that comes across in the film. And I think what people listening who maybe haven't seen the film might think, oh, it sounds really heavy, like that's quite an undertaking. But I think one of the achievements of the film is that it retains a lightness about it, and these personalities, even as it kind of dips into real trauma and real kind of dark moments. I wondered if you could talk about kind of crafting that, I suppose, once you had the stories there, and you must have had a lot of footage. Like, how did you strike that balance of, this is serious stuff, but it also needs to be a 90-minute film that people feel like they can access? Yeah,
I think one of the main kind of comments in the question and answer sessions we've had in Australia and New Zealand is, were the guys drunk the whole time, because they seem to be having a great camaraderie kind of drinking session at the end of every day. And it was sort of a way to pat yourself on the back and just to celebrate the 20 kilometers or 25 kilometers that they had achieved that day. And when Noel and I first came up with the form or the overriding themes of the film. We wanted to make something that was uplifting and feel good. So although the backstories of a lot of our characters are on the heavier side, with personal loss or physical loss, I think when people watch the film, they'll also get a nice sense of a sort of a team coming together from all different walks of life and then achieving something collectively. I think that's what we wanted to do.
And they do open up to the camera, and there are several key moments where I remember one bit in particular where Sue says, "Don't film this. I don't want you to film this." And Noel, you were the cameraman, right?
Yes. I was the cinematographer on the film.
Yeah.
We shot with one camera, and there are those situations where it's very hard making documentary, knowing where that line is and trying not to cross it. And but I think a lot of it comes down to the building the relationships beforehand. And at that point, there would be moments where we'd not film, but then there'd be moments where I'd continue filming because I thought it was important for their story. And whether or not they'd be happy or allow that into the film later in the piece was up to them later on. But I felt that it was important to at least get it. And I was able to do that because we were walking with these subjects and living with them and eating dinner and meals with them every single day. So we built up a relationship with them quite quickly. But if we didn't have that, there's no way that I'd feel comfortable kind of, going past that line and filming.
John, to come back to you, and you were talking there about how the Camino offers something which it's difficult to replicate in any other part of life. Although obviously we do have a version of it now in this lockdown, but it's still different. But this idea that I wanted to ask you about is the kind of facing of the self, which comes up in the film, that there's a certain section of the Camino where it's all about, this is it now. I've got to sort of look at who I really am. And there's sort of no escaping that. I wondered if you could talk a little bit just from your own experiences of walking the Camino and what that does to your sense of yourself, and also why you feel, I suppose, that is an important thing for people in the time we now live in to consider.
Well, I think, Camino Skies actually does it very well. You mentioned, all of you in a way, one of the secrets of the Camino and why it's probably a very good thing to certainly initially walk it, take the physical journey, not only because of the block of time and the space that happens there for the answers to come, but also because we get this wonderful sense of this camaraderie. It really builds. Noel mentioned it earlier about, you're eating and drinking the whole time. You're on a journey together. So intimacy builds and trust builds, and this sense of sort of being part of a unique little family group where trust has built to the extent that we can start sharing our stories. And that's partly where the joy and the healing comes, because we have people who are all of us of a like mind, all struggling in their own ways with the questions that face us, different questions, but to some extent the same. It's all a question of a struggle and a search for answers. And so that's part of what the efficacy of the Camino is. It's this support network to support us through our pain, our drama, whatever it is, or through a false sense of sort of joviality to break through to a more authentic situation. All that happens on the Camino. We need to be careful because it can become something that we need to do in order to have that experience of trusting life. Like the church on a Sunday, but we forget for the rest of the week, what it was we went to that sense of community for. And there comes a time where it's really necessary to bring that experience home into our own lives. So this is answering your question directly. You know, we're locked in our home now. There's absolutely no point in becoming a serial Caminoite. The only way we can access the sense of trust in life and in our fellow humanity and fellow beings is to be out on the Camino. We've lost the point. We have to bring it home so that that experience we have out on the way, we bring back into our everyday life. You know, people sometimes ask me, well, is each Camino you do, you still get that same experience that you had the first time? Yes and no. It's still a sense of trusting, but I really now fundamentally see my life as a journey. It has ups and downs, there's good days, bad days, just like on the Camino. But I really mean it when I say I can never, ever again not be on the Camino. I'm on the Camino right now talking to you, and I mean that sincerely, but I don't need to be there in order to feel that sense of camaraderie, a sense of a bigger perspective, and in order to feel that I'm living my life and if you like, my contract and the reason why I came here. So I think that's missed out on these things. So, you take all these wonderful characters on the Camino Skies, going through all wonderfully different characters, all going through their different stories. But one imagines and hopes that these individuals, when we get back into our everyday life, whether that's lockdown because of coronavirus or anything else, we're able to bring that experience back home with us.
That's great. And Noel and Fergus, then I would bring it back to you, because the first part of this question really is, in making this film, did you walk the whole route? And I guess the question is really about your experience of the Camino, and if sort of making this film feels like some of those things that John was talking about, were they things that you were learning in the making of the film, or was it more of you're seeing other people doing that, and did it make you want to go back and do it sort of just as a walk? There's a lot of questions in there, but I guess you get the idea.
Yeah, it was really difficult for us because we were there and we were a tiny crew. There was only 3 of us all up and 1 camera. Fergus was doing sound, and so our days would start with sunrise and get on the road as soon as possible, and whoever it was that we were following that day, and then we'd walk with them all day, and we did walk the entire way, and carried all our own gear. So we went through the whole process, but because we were so focused on everybody else's stories, I think for us to get a true kind of Camino experience, we'd need to go back again. And that's not to say we definitely, or at least I got moments of it. Usually when, I'd fall behind with the camera, and I'd just be kind of in my own and walking along trying to catch up, or just noticing, looking for little bits to catch up. But I'd say the making of the film was actually sort of my Camino experience. Like it was such a mission, and it to the point where it even almost reflects the different stages of the Camino. Like the first third was the shoot, where it was very physical, it was very difficult, and then the middle section, the Meseta section, was during the edit, when we had all this footage and we were trying to piece it together and find a way to make it work in 80 minutes. And then the last section was, where it all starts working and you're finishing it up and you're getting excited to finally show it to audiences. And there's this real feeling of accomplishment at the end of it. I think making the film was my Camino. What about you, Fergus?
Yeah, I think similar to Noel, it was very hard to stay present and feel like we were learning about ourselves or our own journeys while we were there. But just the achievement, and we had a double achievement in the sense that we made a film, but we also got to make a film about a pilgrimage that we completed ourselves. So almost got a double certification, and that feels great, especially now in lockdown, and it's tough for everyone out there. And hopefully even watching our film can be a nice, escape to get out of the small apartments that we're living in, or confined to these difficult sanctions.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is. And I just want to conclude, I guess, by coming back to you, John, and just reflecting, like Fergus was saying there, this moment that we're in now, this lockdown across the world will be having a literal, a physical impact on people's ability to walk the Camino. And my question, I suppose, is what do you think is the future of the Camino way, looking from where we are now? And I know it's difficult. No one can see exactly where things are going to go, but just, if you had any thoughts on that, what would they be?
Well, in a way, it's a powerful metaphor, what's happening, because the Camino, if we think of it as a pilgrimage route, which it is, a pilgrim route is by definition an inner journey. There's an outer journey through which we bring our body, but it's essentially what makes it the difference between a hike and a pilgrimage is that the pilgrimage also has an inner reflection. That's what it's the essential ingredient, where we reflect on the existential questions and why we're here. And now lockdown actually really forces us inside. I mean, we're forced inside, but it forces us, or can help us rather than forces, can help us actually, really start, reflecting in terms of that inner journeying. So I think it's very powerful for that reason. The Camino, we're out there in a beautiful landscape temple, but a natural landscape that tends to draw us out. But at the same time, we're being asked to draw ourselves in. So I think in terms of how this is going to pan out, I think is going to force is probably the wrong word, but encourage us to bring those experiences home. As I said earlier, we can't constantly go out to have that experience, to reconnect with who we are, our bigger self, our biggest perspective, by simply taking a journey once a year or twice a year out on the Camino. We have to find, and it was interesting, you both mentioned, Fergus and Noel, about how which I also find when I'm out there with a notebook taking notes about measurements and so on, my note taking and my work becomes my pilgrimage. There's no separation. And I think that's the learning from this and the coronavirus. The coronavirus is part of my pilgrimage. It's part of what life has given me right now and everybody else. So we have to treat it not as something that is separate. It's part of it's an uphill stretch. We've reached a bad stage right now, and it could last for rather a long time. It's a rather steep climb, but we'll get used to it, and we'll develop the muscles and the responses to deal with it effectively. But it's absolutely part of the pilgrimage. It can't, otherwise we miss the point.
Thanks, John. There's a lot of wisdom there, I think. And I think, Fergus and Noel, I think you made a really beautiful film, and I think there's a lot of wisdom to be found in there as well. So thanks again for talking to me today. And if you haven't seen Camino Skies, then check it out. It's available on lots of online platforms, Curzon Home Cinema, good friends of ours at GFT. You can get it there, but you can find it and watch it. And do let us know at GFT if you watch it, what you thought of it. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you, Noel and Fergus and John, for talking to me today. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, John.
Life is so short. Let the good times roll. Yay!
The Camino is life.
Just stop thinking elderly. We're not elderly.
We're not elderly, we're young.
Don't put that in the movie.